Greetings. My name is Kate Rademacher, and I am delighted and honored to be here with one of my favorite writers, Sophfronia Scott. Sophfronia is really blessing us with her presence today. Tomorrow, her new book comes out, March 1st, and it's Wild, Beautiful, and Free. I was honored to get an early copy, and I'm delighted to be here with Sophfronia talking about your new book. Congratulations. The book is really gorgeous on every level, physically, and the writing and the story are just really, really amazing. So congratulations.
Thank you, Kate. I'm thrilled about it.
Well, I would love to just start off, I would like to hear about the project in general and how this came to be, but maybe you can start by telling us about the main character, Jeanette. She really just grabbed my attention from page one. So can you just describe sort of a little bit about Jeanette and who she is and sort of how she's navigating different identities?
Yeah, she's meant to be a powerful heroine. I envisioned her that way from the jump. When you meet her, she is about 12 years old. She is the daughter of an enslaved woman who died giving birth to her, and of the plantation owner on a plantation in Louisiana. But the father loved the mother, loves the child, and so raises Jeanette in his house along with his white wife and white daughter, and cares for her deeply until he suddenly dies. And his wife, who of course never liked the idea of this interloper being in her house anyway, sells Jeanette into slavery. And she begins a journey of coming of age in dealing with slavery, dealing with being a mixed race person who in 1850s America really has no place in society. So figuring out how is she going to escape this situation, and how is she going to live in the world, but then also how to get back home to claim her birthright, because her father did set aside very specific property for her, wanted her to have it, wanted her to have a home, and she is determined to reclaim it.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I mean, her story is so harrowing to go from living, what is it called, the big house or the main house in her childhood, and then suddenly her beloved father dies and she's sold into slavery, as you say. It's just so deeply disturbing to read about. And one of the early chapters, the man who actually facilitates that sale tells her not to speak. That she would be anyone would understand that she's educated if they heard her speak. So for several chapters, she doesn't speak. And so, I thought that was a compelling, part of this whole experience for her. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, sort of find her the role of her voice in all of this.
Yeah, and this is something that drives her, the fact that that she spent so long unable to speak, and that she understands the power of that, and it drives her. Like, she will not be put in a situation again where her voice is silenced. But it also makes her realize again the markings of how her father cared for her. The fact that she does sound different, the fact that she has an exquisite knowledge of geography and has a sense of where she is in the world, and she knows that she's different. But instead of having that make her ashamed, she's determined to live this existence. Okay, this is who I am. My father's care made me who I am, but how do I live this out? Right? Where do I belong in this world?
And without giving things away, I mean, do you feel like by the end of the book, she does find her place in the world? I mean, is that sort of where this is heading for her?
I think the biggest part of her journey is not just going home, but learning how to navigate the negative feelings that come from her situation. And she actually learns a big chunk of that early on from her friend Fanny, who looks after her a good amount when she is a slave. And the bigger part of Jeanette wants to be angry, wants to be resentful and deep in that anger. And Fanny tells her, you can't let other people make you this. This is not who you are meant to be. You are not naturally an angry person. And and really makes her focus on the love of her father, that despite this situation, that she is not meant to be a certain way. So that's hard to hear, especially when terrible things happen to Fanny. So Jeanette has taken this seed of what Fanny has taught her about forgiveness, and she is trying to grasp that. What does this mean, right? And how do I live when all of these awful things keep happening?
Yeah, thank you for that. And one of the things that struck me about the relationship with Fanny was their discussions about faith.
Yeah.
Um, and Fanny, sort of seeming to have a simple but very pure faith. And in their conversations, Jeanette sort of struggling with her own faith. And I know that you are a person of faith and a faith-based writer. And, your last book previous to this was The Seeker and the Monk about Thomas Merton. And so can you just talk about the theme of faith throughout the book and how you approach fiction writing as someone who's, writing and thinking about faith in general?
Kate, it's interesting to me when that comes up, when people say, well, there's faith in the book, but it's okay. It's not a religious book and all of this. And I find it interesting that people kind of zoom in on that. It's like, well, to me, it's like, I don't know, the struggle of life of any character involves of your way of thinking about the world, right? And for a lot of us, the way we think about the world is based on faith. So how am I going to draw a character who is struggling with awful things if God is not somehow in the picture? So to me, that's just a given. I'm going to talk about that, but it's also important because what is the thing that we say when bad things happen? We say, can't believe God did this. So what kind of God would allow this? And to me, it's like, well, I don't think that's how it works. And if that's not how it works, then we need to rethink how we relate to God, especially in the tragedy of our lives. So, when I write fiction, it tends to be showing how characters work out issues that relate to all of us.
Well, and I really appreciate that about this book because the faith is sort of woven in, like just, so seamlessly, as you're sort of saying, it's how she's making sense of the world. Just to go back to some of the difficult things in the early part of the book, I'll just share that when I was reading, I was totally gripped and absorbed. And there's a difficult situation that happens early after she was sold into slavery that involves sexual assault. And just as I was reading that, my 17-year-old daughter walked in the room, and there was just such a painful juxtaposition of this just, difficult situation on the page, and my beautiful daughter standing there. And, I had this temptation to put the book down just because it was so hard, not because I wasn't loving it. And so, we're interviewing this, we're interviewing, this in the middle of Black History Month, or I guess at the end of Black History Month. And so just as our country continues to deal with the legacy of violent white supremacy, the reality today, the history and the reality of violent white supremacy, and how do you think how do you think novels like yours help us continue to not look away from these difficult and painful realities?
Some of what you're talking about actually harkens back to my previous novel, Unforgivable Love. And one of the points I make in that novel is that the things that happen, a lot of things that happen in terms of sexual abuse, to me, happens because we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it with our children. We don't help them develop their sexuality, and that makes them prey to other people who use that power against them. So to me, I think it's important to talk about this because it is part of our history, right? We have mixed race characters in this book. Really, I'm willing to bet tons of us in this country, we are all mixed race, whether we realize it or not, because of this history, right? So it is, we cannot ignore it. So it is going to be part of this story. And again, it's a horrible thing where, to me, there's a decision that has to be made about whether one lets the abuse destroy them, or whether you find some way to move through it and not forget about it, but not carry it with you your whole life.
Right. Well, and this is maybe a good segue. Before we started recording, we were talking about the idea of courageous compassion.
Yeah.
And that, compassion, perhaps without courage, isn't as powerful. And so just as, I was thinking about your characters, and some of them are really difficult, including the white wives of these men who commit some of these horrible acts of sexual assault, sexual violence. So my question for you is, as a writer, do you have compassion for all your characters? Do you empathize with all of them? Or are there some characters you write about that you just don't have compassion for, or can't stand, essentially?
Okay, I'm sitting at my desk right here, Kate. Here's a star. It says compassion. Compassion is written on it because it's something that I need to keep in front of me. I think compassion and empathy is hugely important, not for people who create stories like myself, but for how we work our way through differences, right? How are we to work through issues of racism and disagreement and abuse if we don't try to have some form of compassion and understanding for this other person, even if they do horrible things to me or other people, right? That person, whether we want to admit it or not, that person is somebody's child, right? And there is something that brought them to this point, and they are human beings as well as we are. So we cannot dismiss someone else, because how does that make us any different from them, right? If they are looking at me or someone like me as less than, then for me to return that hatred is to do the same, right? And I don't think that our hearts are meant to do that. My friend Jane, who lives down the street, said, I think you're all about redemption. And I said, yeah, I guess so. I don't throw people away, but I also think that we're not meant to do that. We are not meant to do that. And I also think that is what carries us through the world when bad things do happen to us, right? That we have to be able to forgive in order to move on, not to forget, not to let people off the hook, but to not lose sense of our own humanity, right?
Well, and just as you were speaking, I thought a passage from your book came to my mind, and so maybe I could ask you to read it. I have it right here. It's on page 66, and so maybe if you're willing to read it. So what's happening here is, you mentioned Fanny, page 66 at the bottom. You mentioned Fanny was one of Jeanette's beloved friends, and what you were just describing about having compassion for your character. I'm looking at the paragraph that starts, "My skin felt like I touched hot coals," and just the inner narrative that Jeanette has at that time. Would you be willing to read that section?
Yes, yeah. So what is happening here is that poor Fanny is giving birth to a child as a result of having been raped repeatedly by the overseer. And as she is giving birth, she is in labor. The wife of the overseer has come out and is being abusive to Fanny, and Jeanette is basically getting the woman away from her, and the woman is whipping Jeanette as a result. And I'll take up a sentence beforehand. When she's whipping Fanny, "She managed to strike me on the arm I had raised to protect myself. The sleeve of my dress tore. She landed another lash on my shoulder. My skin felt like I'd touched hot coals. I looked at Mrs. Everett and saw the purple welt bleeding on her chin and realized I could hate this woman, but what would I be hating? I saw a soul so sad and furious she didn't know herself, and I was no more to her than a spider she wanted to crush underfoot. I'd have to work hard, make numerous changes in my brain to create hate for such a pitiful person. What would I have to mold myself into to conjure such hate? Fanny had been right. I wouldn't be myself if I did it.
Thank you for that. I hear a little Thomas Merton in that too.
uh,
That just
I was just trying not to cry because I haven't looked at that in a while. So, yeah.
right.
But yeah.
That question, I could hate this woman, what would I be hating? You
Yeah.
know, just how sad she is.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for reading that to us. And just, I mentioned the reason I mentioned Thomas Merton, for those who don't know, your previous nonfiction book, The Seeker and the Monk, was about your journey with Thomas Merton. So one question I had for you was just as a writer, what's the difference? How is the process different for you writing fiction versus nonfiction? Can you just talk a little bit about sort of the journey you go through as a writer and sort of how, just how the process is different, if at all?
When people ask me about that, I tend to say that when I have something that I really want to say, that a hard thing, I tend to write fiction because it's easier. I think it's easier to absorb, to hear it in a story, right? And this particular story for me was important because I know how a character like this changed my life. Right. So I read Jane Eyre when I was like 13. And you mentioned the interior dialogue just now. Reading Jane Eyre taught me how to think. I had a difficult childhood and I wanted nothing more than to get out of that house. But I didn't know how to do that. And reading Jane Eyre, that character thought her way through things. She taught me how to think. She taught me how to think about my life. She taught me how to think about even just how to get out of a situation, right? Okay, I need to leave here. How do I do that? I need to get a job. Well, how do I get a job? Well, I don't have any connection. I must advertise. I think that's even the sentence in the book. I must advertise, right? So to me, the big idea in my mind was I wanted to create a character like that for women of color. I wanted to have the heroine with a capital, beautiful H, somebody who not only inspired, but who would walk with people. Like I see women having read this character and not forgetting her, and even thinking, okay, Jeanette did this, I can do this, right? So I think in a big picture way when I'm writing fiction, right? Big landscape, imagery, scene, how do I put you into this image of my brain and tell you this story, which I think is so important and so beautiful. When I write nonfiction, I feel that I tend to be answering questions, right? So the Thomas Merton book, for example, came about because of the response to the way I spoke about him at a conference and people coming up to me. And I realized that people didn't know how to get into Merton. They love him, they've heard about him, but they are intimidated by him, this man who's written all of this. And so I realized, why don't I just share with you how I read Merton, right? And the book I wrote with my son, This Child of Faith, I'm answering a question people are asking about, well, how does your son, how did he develop his faith? And how do you do that, right? It's like, okay, well, let me share my journey with you. And that's how nonfiction tends to come about for me.
Thank you. I love that nonfiction is about answering questions. And then it sounds like writing fiction is more about being on a journey with your character, just as the journey, as Jeanette was taking this journey, you're journeying with her. And I like that, heroine with the big H, and that's clearly what she is. And also just, I'm looking at the poster behind you and I have the book with me. It's just a beautiful book physically. And of course the word beautiful is in the title. Can you just say a little bit about the title, Wild, Beautiful, and Free? What this, does this have any, special meaning for you? Or I mean, it's straightforward, but
well, Bill, my editor actually put that together. She said she said, "Do you realize these are the words you describe Colchester's eyes?" And I hadn't really thought about that phrase, or even to pull it out and put it on a book cover. And I was like, "Whoa, yeah, I guess so." Um, because I do feel that there is an energy about this character and about the way she lives her life, as quiet as it may seem in certain ways, but that she is fierce in a certain way, right? Um, and wild in that she is really tamed by nobody, and determined to live her life in a certain way. So I loved that. And but there were things that we talked about, and I said, okay, but we have a title like that. I do not want people on the cover, because I don't want it to look like a romance novel, which it is not, right? So I liked that the designer who designed this, and I will even say her name, I just want to get it right. I think it's Leslie Worrell. Leslie Worrell designed the cover of this book. Yeah, Leslie Worrell. And I loved that it focuses on what could be a depiction of Catalpa Valley, right? The home, the land, and these striking colors, which actually, reminded me of Gone with the Wind, right? So I was like, okay. So it makes the cues, right? The cues that this is the South, right? And I love the font, which is 1800s font. So I feel like in many ways the cover of this book tells the story of the book. So I'm just thrilled by it.
It's gorgeous. Well, and when you were talking about the title, you mentioned the character of Colchester. Can you just tell us a little bit about him and how that relationship with Jeanette evolves?
He's a curious character himself, because he owned a plantation himself. He inherited it in the South, and but when he did so, he set the slaves free, and essentially moved everyone, because he understood that they really wouldn't be free if they remained in the South. Essentially moved everyone to Ohio, and helped them establish their own village, right? And that's how Jeanette comes to be there. She is hired to be the teacher in this village of free people of color, and he is someone who seems to be um, a man of means, but not comfortable in those means, right? And as a young man who has been, given his way most of his life, he is rambunctious in that way, and untamed. Something that he and Jeanette can relate to, right? He is untamed in a certain way. Has a love of Louisiana in the same way that she does, and so they bond on that, even though he's the once white owner of this place, right? So but she, and maybe it's through a sense of compassion, maybe because on a certain level he probably reminds her of her father, but she feels connected to him.
Well, I just really want to again congratulate you on this book. It's such a sweeping and beautiful and challenging novel. And you said a few minutes ago, just as we sort of close up, I want to ask you sort of, what are your hopes for the book? You mentioned a minute ago sort of Jane Eyre and women of color and sort of this heroine with this big H. I think that's really beautiful. Is there anything else that sort of you want to just say about what you hope this book kind of accomplishes in the world, or where it's heading?
Of course, I would love for it to reach a huge audience and to be a bestseller, but I have to say that the emails that I've been getting already and I've been getting them from people who are white, as well as especially white men. I've gotten some emails from white men telling me how this book has touched them, right? I want this book to have people think about empathy, to think about compassion, to think about where they find forgiveness in their own lives. And that has been exciting. I've been getting emails and messages, and I think it's in some of the reviews. Like, if you read some of the reviews on Goodreads and Amazon, there are people saying that this book has changed their life. That changed their life, and they can't forget about it. They didn't want to put it down. One woman said that she feels like she wants to keep it with her and keep reading it again and again, right? So to me, that's huge. To already have done that for however many people, I think the book is in my book, a success already. So yes, it would. So wouldn't it be awesome to have that sense on a bigger scale? But even to do that for one person is special.
Yeah, well, and what's amazing is we're actually speaking the day before the book officially comes out.
Yeah.
So the book is officially coming out March 1st, 2023, and today is February 28th. So these are pre-reads that are so really amazing. Congratulations that already people are just having this outpouring of reaction, and I can totally understand why. So can you tell us, where can we get the book? Where can folks get the book, and where can they find out more information about you and your writing?
Well, of course, you should always support your independent booksellers at bookshop.org. But the book is published by an imprint of Amazon. So the book is everywhere. So it is on Audible. You can get it via CD. They also have MP3s of it. It's hardcover. There are also paperback versions. This book is out there. So you can get it any way you want it. It's on Kindle. So
Great.
yeah,
Well,
you'll
thank you
find
so
it.
much. Thank you so much for your words, and thank you for your time today. This is, again, Sophfronia Scott. She's the author of Wild, Beautiful, and Free, which is just available now everywhere. And really strongly encourage you to check it out. It's an amazing book. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Kate.
And blessings as you move forward with the launch.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Take care.